All right, hey guys, let me cut everybody off for just a second. We're back with our next guest, very special guest. Honored to have him on the show today. He is a famed promoter and manager out of the UK, and we've been looking to have him on here. Most recently, we spoke to on the show David Price. Right now is his most prized fighter on his stable, his very talented stable. So without further ado, the legendary Frank Maloney. Frank, how you doing today?
I'm very well, thank you. And thank you for having me on your radio station.
Hey, it's a complete honor to have you. We hear a lot of news coming out from the UK here in the United States, and I say this to everybody that we have on from the UK. It's on fire, basically, the boxing scene out there. And Frank, you're basically leading the charge. You have one of the hottest fighters coming out of the UK. A lot of people are talking about him, about being the next great heavyweight. He's returning to the ring in Liverpool. We're going to be able to watch it here in the United States on Welt TV. I know you guys over there have it on Box Nation, but we're talking about David Price. He's fighting a two-time world heavyweight title contender in Tony the Tiger Thompson. How excited are you about this fight for David Price? I got a ton of questions for you, but how excited are you about the 23rd of February?
I'm very excited because, it's a step up. People have been saying that I've kept David Price wrapped in cotton wool, but I haven't. He's been learning his trade. I believe that I've got a great reputation with heavyweights. I took Lennox Lewis from 1989 when he signed me all the way to Undisputed Heavyweight Championship. I've had a number of European champions. I guided part of John Ruiz's career to number one in the world, moving up from cruiserweight to heavyweight. So I have a great record with heavyweights, and I believe there's a boxing business and there's a heavyweight division. And if you do the heavyweight division right and you guide your fighter's career right, you're going to end up with a very good fighter. And that's what David Price is. He's been learning his trade under the radar, and now he's ready to take the leash off.
Mentioned Lennox Lewis, Frank, and I know you've been asked this a million times. We just haven't heard it. But between Lennox Lewis and David Price, you helped lead him to become undisputed heavyweight champion, as you mentioned it. Do you feel, with what you have now in David Price, do you feel he can exceed the accomplishments? Many think Lennox Lewis is a top 3, top 5 greatest heavyweight of all time. Do you think David Price can exceed his accomplishments?
Well, what you do is you judge heavyweights in the time they're around. Lennox Lewis, if he was around today, would probably dominate the heavyweight division the way the Chicos have. David Price, I look at what's out there, and I see no one. I see no one that David Price has to fear. I look at the Americans. The average age of American heavyweights are 40 years old, and they're all the guys that I watch with Lennox Lewis. I mean, there's Seth Mitchell, but he's been beaten by Jonathan Banks, so he's dented material. There's the other guy who's undefeated, but he hasn't fought no one if you look at his record. So there is no one for David to fear. There's a couple of Eastern Europeans, but they don't bring anything to the table. They're good fighters. They're complete fighters, and but they just don't bring any excitement, and they don't bring the fan base you need for the heavyweight division. I believe the heavyweight champion has to come from the USA or Great Britain, because that's where the fan base is, and that's where the TVs are.
Hey, Frank, how you doing? This is go ahead.
No, again, Mike, I was just actually going to introduce. Frank, I was just going to actually introduce one of my co-hosts, Michael Dawes. He jumped in there.
Hello, Michael.
So,
hey, Frank, how are you?
Not bad, thanks.
My question is, like Frank talked about, you worked a lot with Lennox Lewis, but what I've seen is even at Lennox's time, where he was around the same time as David Price is currently in his career, I don't remember you matching Lennox with a 6'5", lanky southpaw. What's driving you to match him with Tony Thompson? I mean, there's only one southpaw.
Tony Thompson was Tony Thompson's the highest available American, and he's the one who wanted to fight. Everyone else we offered to didn't want to fight. He's ranked number 10 up in the IBF. He's only got 2 defeats on his record. I did match Lennox. I matched Lennox with Mike Weaver at one time. Very similar situation. I know he wasn't a southpaw, but it was a gamble fight for Lennox. I matched Lennox with Ray Mercer without a title on the line. So you have to take these gambles with your fighters to see if they're good enough to step up to that sort of level.
So the southpaw situation is, is it more of a Vladimir Klitschko, gauge, or is it more of a, seeing how he can find a southpaw as well? We got another southpaw champion.
No, listen, he knocked out all the others in one round, so he was a southpaw. He knocked out another southpaw early. The amateurs today, I'm not a great southpaw or orthodox. If you train right for the fight, it doesn't matter what they are. You hit them, they're going to go the same way anyway. I'm from the old school of boxing.
Oh, yeah. Well,
see, I'm very much from the old school.
Well,
sorry?
You got a lot of potential, in England right now with potential mega fight with Tyson Fury. I know it's still early, and I know there was many times that you put money on the table, or I've heard you put money on the table. Has there been any more talks or any talks at all with Tyson Fury's people, or are you just waiting, for the Thompson fight to happen?
Do you know what? Tyson Fury and David Price remind me of Lennox Lewis and Riddick Bowe. There's a lot of hot air, but the one side doesn't want the fight, and one side really does want the fight. So I'll leave you to guess the side that doesn't want the fight. We take that fight tomorrow.
Well, the money you put on the table before, that was official offer. Didn't you offer £500,000?
We went up to 650 actually, yeah. Nearly just short of about $800,000 for a heavyweight fight. That's good money in today's market without a title on the line.
Oh, of course. But did you ever hear any real feedback from Tyson Fury's people, or was it just a bunch of Twitter stuff?
No, we've heard nothing. All we had was abuse on Twitter. We had a barrage of abuse on Twitter.
Now, Frank, is that the reluctancy of the promoters in the UK working together? I know Tyson's with Hennessy Sports. You got Frank Warren, you got Matchroom, the Hearns and stuff like that, Eddie Hearn. Now, we have the same similar situation over here in the United States, Top Rank and Golden Boy. What is it? Now, Frank, I'm a huge fan. I love your interviews on everything I could see on YouTube. Anywhere I could see an interview with Frank Maloney, I think you're outspoken. I think you tell it like it is. I'm a fan of you. Your interviews are sensational, especially the work you do in boxing. But I got to ask you this, man. What is it with, a lot of these guys, the promoters that I mentioned, their reluctancy to work together? It seems like not only is it a fight between the fighters, but it's a fight between you. It's a fight between Frank Warren or whoever. You know what I'm saying? What's going on there in the UK?
Well, listen, it's like everything else. I've always been brought up, I was brought up under the late Dan Duver, who taught me nearly everything I know about boxing and taught me about negotiations and how to make a fight. People told me I would never make Lewis and Holyfield, yet we spent over 18 hours with Don King without a break trying to make that fight, and eventually we made the fight. So I'm a great believer. If you talk, you can make fights. I will make any fight as long as the other side want to come to the table. I'm not a deal breaker, I'm a deal maker. And there's a big difference. A lot of the other promoters are deal breakers, and they're protecting their golden goose because they're frightened. Listen, if David Price gets beat, I know I'm out of the business. But you've got to give the fans what they want. You've got to give the public what they want, and you've got to give television what they want. If you want boxing to succeed, it's very competitive out there. There's a lot more sports out there now, and there's a lot more people demanding TV times and demanding the revenue. I don't know in America, but in Britain, boxing is the only sport where the license fees have actually gone down instead of up.
And I agree, Frank. And I got to ask you this right now. Tyson Fury. What are your thoughts right now as him as a fighter? He had an impressive win, I guess, over a former world title challenger in Kevin Johnson. Wasn't an exciting fight. Definitely wasn't an exciting fight. Maybe one of the more boring fights of the year. But what are your thoughts on Tyson Fury? Do you think, he's doing good for the United Kingdom? Do you think he's doing as good as for a fighter in the United Kingdom? I know he said some questionable things about you and your fighters in the past. But what are your thoughts on him as a fighter as he progresses on?
Well, he's developed, but everyone forgets I had a fighter that beat Tyson Fury and got robbed by the referee. And there was a big inquiry about the fight. The only person in the arena who thought Tyson Fury won the night was the referee, and it happened to be a referee that in his boxing career was knocked out by John McDermott's father, who was a heavyweight. Yeah, Stan McDermott. So you know, I like Tyson. He's got a big heart. He'll give it 100%. But until he really fights someone, you can't judge him. He hasn't fought anyone. I saw the Kevin Johnson fight. It was like a punch. He was fighting a punch bag in there. Johnson didn't come to do anything other than just survive 12 rounds.
Hey, Frank, Tim Cudgett, I just wanted to jump in real quick. You mentioned the Tyson Fury McDermott fight. Am I correct? Didn't you have a heart attack after that score was announced?
I had it during the fight. Yes. I was at ringside. I thought I was in such agony and pain. I fell to the floor, but I couldn't let anyone see because my fighter was winning. So I sat there for about a couple of minutes, and then all of a sudden, I sort of the pain passed, and I was able to get back and start shouting and screaming again.
Yeah, you take your boxing. Yeah, that's what I said, Frank. You take your boxing serious. That's what we like.
Listen, I'm very passionate about my boxing. It's the only thing I've ever done since I was 10 years old. I wasn't good enough to be a fighter because I was dripping wet. I was only a flyweight. But you know, I love the people in boxing. I love the fans, and I just love the doors it's opened for me. It's changed my life, and it's changed a lot of other people's lives.
Now, here's another thing, and I got it. When this is kind of even bringing back the first question I was trying to talk to you about, the promoters, the politics. You're involved. I don't know if you're still involved, but you are involved, or were involved in politics, regular politics. What's the difference between the boxing politics and regular politics?
I think they're all as crooked as each other. I don't think many of them can lay in bed straight at night. I don't know. It's all about power struggle, isn't it? Everyone wants to be the most powerful man on the street. You know, the high and mighty number one. I mean, it's just not there. You know, there's a big cake out there. Everyone should share the cake. I'm a great believer that one person controlling everything is a monopoly, and it's bad for the business. We had that in the time of Don King, until Bob Arum came along and Dan Dougal with main events and broke the monopoly. And, at the moment, it seems that Golden Boys are trying to dominate not only in America, maybe the world scene. It's over here we've got Eddie Hearns and Matchroom trying to dominate boxing. Frank Warren's bought out his TV station, so he's actually returning something to boxing now as well, I believe, because without his TV station, boxing in Britain would be dead without Box Nation. I've just done a new deal with a TV company called Loaded. I'm their boxing consultant. We're doing our third show this Friday night, cruiserweight British title fight between one of my young fighters, John Lewis Dickinson, and David Dolan. So it's, there are opportunities out there, but you've got to look for them. But you've got to realise the big days of the big money at the moment is not there unless you find a superstar. America's got to build a superstar, and we've got to try and build a superstar. And hopefully, in David Price, I've got one. America, I'm not sure who you've got at the moment. You've got a few smaller weights, but you haven't got any big boys.
No, we don't. Heavyweights, Frank, you could look, everybody we ever talked to, and we agree with everybody around the world. We talk to everybody. And, I mean, the heavyweight division it's pretty dead out here. There's a couple bright spots, but not worth mentioning yet until these guys actually fight somebody. You mentioned your other fighter, Dickinson. I got to ask you this, and I don't mean to throw. I'm going to try not to throw one of your fighters under the bus, Frank. We recently spoke to one of your undefeated fighters, and he was saying that he didn't necessarily. Obviously, he's not smart enough to go out there and say he's unhappy with you, but he did kind of say that you put a little bit too much into David Price. I mean, if you want me to mention it, I'll mention it, but you didn't hear this from me. Well, obviously you did because we're international on air. But I'm just saying, I mean, what are your thoughts on that? So try not to throw one of your fighters under the bus. He recently won.
No, listen, you can tell me who the fighter is. I admit I do put a lot into David Price because David Price is the flagship. If without the heavyweight, without David Price, I wouldn't have any television dates. So I'm not gonna tell lies. It was the same when I had Lennox Lewis. But from Lennox Lewis, I managed to build a big successful stable. I guided Scott Harrison to a world title. I guided Paul Ingalls to a world title. I've guided a few other fighters. If I hadn't done the job with Lennox Lewis, I wouldn't have been promoting David Hay. I wouldn't have got asked to promote Ricky Hatton's comeback fight in Great Britain. So you've got to look at the situation. And yes, I do put a lot into David Price because he is the one that will generate the interest in boxing. As I said, there's heavyweights and there's a boxing division. And please, give me the heavyweight division anytime.
Well, we have an old saying out here, especially in the boxing business. I think it goes everywhere. If it don't make dollars, it don't make sense. I think you know what that means.
Well, that's quite true. You know, I love all the old sayings in boxing. You know, there's the other saying in boxing, no matter what you do for a fighter today, it's not enough because he's going to ask you what you're going to do tomorrow for him.
No, absolutely, Frank. No, and speaking of that, I mean, he didn't really, he didn't come on there and bash it, but it was Glenn Foote, recent prize fighter winner. We asked him who was he being promoted, who was he working with, and he mentioned you, and he was saying something about the fights on his contract, and we didn't really.
Yeah, listen. But what Glenn Foote forgets, and I like Glenn Foote. He's on my show on the 15th of March. What he forgets is we lost our TV contract. We were on Sky. I'd been promoting on Sky for over 15 years, and all of a sudden they pulled my contract. You can't promote fighters with the salaries they had in their contracts without TV. And it's happened to a lot of promoters in America. As I said, the game has changed. And, I've had to change as a promoter. I've had to cut my cloth to suit the situation. And if it means reducing fights for fighters, I'm not a charity. I can't produce the dollar and pay fighters if it's not coming through the box office or through the TV.
How about this, Frank? I'm glad you clarified that. I mean, we actually spoke to Glenn last week, and we had a good interview with him. I think he's a great fighter. I think he shocked a lot of people.
He's a great fighter. He's got a great prospect. But the young kids, they fighters are not businessmen, are they? And promoters are not boxers. But together, we all need each other, and we have to work. But sometimes, unfortunately, for fighters intend to listen to the last person who speaks to them, and if they say the promoter's doing a bad job or their manager's doing a bad job, they'll agree with them. Listen, if a fighter loses, he never blames himself. He blames everyone else around him.
Yeah, hey, nobody tells them, nobody put a gun to their head to tell them to sign those contracts. I always say that.
Right.
A lot of the promoters, the boxing fans, and a lot of other people, everybody is quick to blame a promoter, quick to blame the manager that they're broke. But nobody forces them to sign a contract, not pay their taxes. So I get you on that. We sympathize, especially I sympathize with the business side of boxing as well as I do with the fighters. But you mentioned, Glenn Foote, obviously a talented young prospect you got. You mentioned John Lewis Dickinson getting ready to fight, another talented prospect you got coming up, cruiserweight. Just so we know, who are some of these guys that we should look out for that you're working with?
Well, I've got another young heavyweight called Gary Cornish who's fighting this Friday night on the Dickinson bill, and I've got another cruiserweight called Danny Price, who was a teammate of David Price in the GB squads, and I've also got flyweight Kevin Satchel. Oh, look, let me just call my dog because I'm walking my dogs in the park and they're running out. Come here, Winnie. Come here. Come on. Come on. Good girl. Come. Sorry about this. Go on, chaps. I'm back now.
Okay, sorry. I cut off Mike Dawes. Mike Dawes. I know you were trying to jump back in there.
Oh, it's all right. This is a kind of a hard question. I mean, if you don't want me to ask any hard questions, I won't. But this is going to be
No, you can ask what you like. Listen, I can only tell you an honest answer. Sometimes I speak without thinking. I get myself in a lot of trouble. But I basically speak from the heart when I speak. That's one of the problems I do have.
I do the same thing. That's why I'm asking you if I could basically ask this question. Here it is. A couple of years ago, you were, according to several media outlets, you were contemplating retiring. You were saying, if I get one more world champion, I'm going to retire. And nothing came out of that. Then last year, with the sudden death of Darren Sutherland, a guy that you were really close with, you said you were going to retire. What changed your mind from that, and does that still stand?
At this moment, I don't want to retire. I lost my enthusiasm for boxing. I had a terrible tragedy. I had the heart attack on the Friday, which I didn't really know about. I just thought it was pains in my chest. Then on the Monday, I discovered the body of Darren Sutherland, and I completely freaked out. And next thing I knew, I was in hospital. My heart stopped when they were operating on me for 30 seconds, I was told. And I was rushed to an emergency heart specialist unit. And I I don't know. I just lost all interest in boxing. I had no, the tragedy of Darren Sutherland just sort of kicked me and took everything out of me, because he was the one I did have expecting to be my next world champion. And then somehow I was just starting to talk to David Price, because I'd heard that he had contractual problems and he was looking to move. And I remember we actually signed the contract with David Price as I was being wheeled down to the operating theatre. It was the hospital, and the doctors and nurses had never seen nothing like it, they said. And then that week I had a show with Jamie Moore, one of my favourite fighters that I worked with, European light middleweight champion, was fighting Ryan Rose in a European title and an eliminator for a world title. And I let someone else run the show. The show lost about $200,000, and Jamie Moore got knocked out in the, I think it was in the 6th or 7th round, I can't remember. And it just really took everything out of me. But I'm glad to say, with the help of my family, with some very good friends around me, and with some of the boxers, and some of the people I work with, my enthusiasm slowly grew back. And maybe it was David Price that done it. Then I lost my Sky contract, which again was, and I thought to myself, do you know what? Frank Maloney has done some good things in boxing and some wrong things, but I've had a great time. I can't go out as a loser. And I think that was the kick up the backside I needed. So I managed to negotiate a contract with Box Nation. I've negotiated a contract to become a consultant to Loaded TV. And do you know what? I've got a bit of my enthusiasm back. I can put the Glenn Foots back out to work now, and I can give some fighters work. Because when you've got fighters under contract and you can't give them work because you haven't got any dates, it makes you feel bad, and because that's their living as well.
Hey, my condolences, Frank. Real quick, though. My condolences. Frank. Because I
want to say something to you, Frank. I want to be honest, though. I mean, Glenn Foote, I wasn't on that interview, but this guy has under 10 fights, and he's getting on our show. He's getting a lot of publicity, so somebody's doing something right. That's just my thoughts about that.
Yeah, well, listen, he won prize fighter, and you know what? He's a good kid up in the northeast. That's where our big show is next week. He would have been on that show, but he'd just come off a prize fight and he went away on holiday. So, and things have changed. Fighters, the fighters and some of the trainers in boxing, they do not understand how the business has changed. I'm a big critic of a lot of trainers. I think there's more fitness trainers in boxing than there's actually teachers. And that's why we're probably not producing superstars anymore. The old school are all slowly disappearing, and we're getting these guys who take fitness courses and they call themselves trainers. And fighters are fitter today than they ever was, but I don't think they've got the skill they had, and they haven't got the excitement, and they haven't got the media savvy that fighters had in the times of the Lewises, Muhammad Ali, Mike Tyson at his peak, and people like that, Roberto Duran, Sugar Ray Leonard. The only one out there today is Floyd Mayweather, but he sort of got himself in trouble. And this young kid who's fighting Gavin Reese-Boner,
like a Duran, and like a Sugar Ray Robinson. Duran didn't train in a ring at a gym with a cage next to him. Sugar Ray Robinson didn't train in a ring with a cage next to it. You got some of these trainers that are going towards MMA and doing both MMA and boxing. And, there's a lot of money to be made in the sport, but I feel that a lot of these trainers are kind of doing everything to make money. And back then, they didn't have that MMA. They didn't have no cages next to the rings, and I think this confused a lot.
No, listen, I've been asked to promote MMA. I've had loads of people come to me, Frank, please, with your experience, you could help. Do you know what? I'm a boxing person, and I want to see boxing survive, so I'm not going to push any other sport. And I've stuck to boxing over the last 30 years, and I've done well out of it, and I hope to finish on the top and walk away from boxing with my head held high.
I think you will, Frank. You know what? I got to ask you this before we get up to the closing stuff. This weekend we have a pretty big fight. We have one of our stars, Adrian Broner, undefeated, defending his title against Gavin Rees. Does Gavin Rees, coming from over in the UK, stand any chance of defeating Adrian Broner, in your opinion?
He's got Slim and none, and Slim's just left town.
Frank, I want to let everybody know where they can find out more about you. You know, at Frank Maloney on Twitter. I know you're pretty active on Twitter as far as giving updates and interacting with fans and friends. Also at www.frankmaloney.com, you can find up all the upcoming events. You know, just want to let everybody know the 23rd, the big event, the 23rd of February. If you're in the UK, Fox Nation's the place to be. If you're in the United States, World TV. In my opinion, future world heavyweight champion David Price going up against two-time world title challenger Tony the Tiger Thompson, which should be a great statement fight for David Price. Actually, I just talked to Mark Harnell. We were talking before we got on this interview, and I know you guys are really expecting a big statement from Price, so that's what we look forward to. He's an explosive fighter, and, you know, Frank, you saying at the end you still got a lot to give. This kid David Price is, I think that's your ticket right there, man. He's making a lot of noise over here. We hope you get to bring him out here sometime, too. I hope he gets an opportunity to fight out here.
I'm hoping to bring him out. But I will say this about Gavin Reese. I don't think he can win the fight, but I've worked with Gavin. He will come, he will give 100%, and he will go out on his shield. And that's what I worry about, because Broner is a very good fighter. If he was a heavyweight, he would have liked the whole of America again, that man. You know, he's got everything you want in a boxer: showmanship, talent, and can fight.
No, and I agree. Gavin Reese would really end something nice if he did that. But no, you know, big respect to Gavin Reese for coming out here. But Frank, any final words out there for the listeners?
Just tune in and watch David Price, because, you know, we're going to conquer America the same way we did with Lennox Lewis. And, you know, we had great times with the American people out there and the press out there and, you know, the fans. Lennox became a champion of the world, unlike the Klitschko's, who have stayed in the safety net of Germany and the Eastern Bloc countries and have not really exploited the talent that God gave them.
Frank, we appreciate that, man, and we'd love to invite you back on the show if you would be willing to come back on, talk a little bit boxing with us sometime again in the future.
I'd love to. I would love to. I'm coming out to Vegas to a stag do very soon anyway. Us Brits love Vegas.
Oh, yeah. No, Frank, let me know when you come out. I would love to come out and meet you for a couple of minutes, you know, talk a little bit with you in person. I'll treat you out to a steak dinner or something, man. You come out to Vegas next time.
Okay, I look forward to that. Thank you very much.
All right, Frank Maloney, famed boxing promoter, boxing manager. Definitely great honor having him on the show today. And look out for him at Frank Maloney on Twitter. And a sensational interview. We appreciate his time. And like I said, David Price, 23rd of February, Well TV.